What's going on, guys? It's Cooper Codes, and in this video we're going to take a look at Next.js and Chart.js to create this YouTube growth website. The goal of the website is to help YouTubers look at their daily uploads over a certain period of time. So if my uploads get 20 views per day over 25 days, what do my views look like when all those stack up, for example? So if I get 20 views a day on all my daily uploads and I go to 100 days, for example, the graph is then going to update with all these new numbers. You'll see our website's actually generating these numbers. As you can see, it's growing here, and we're also managing the data in our Next.js frontend. This video is a great start for anyone who is beginning in Next.js or any beginners to coding in general. It solves an interesting problem and is relatively simple. Before getting into the code, I'm going to talk about the algorithm we use to generate these numbers. You don't have to fully understand this algorithm, but I think it's worth explaining because it's going to be at the core of our website and it's going to clear some things up when I'm coding. In our example, a YouTuber is going to upload every single day and his videos are going to perform by getting 10 views per day forever. So you can see on day 1, he's going to upload video 1 and it's going to get 10 views, putting his total views at 10. On the second day, he's going to upload video 2. What's going to happen is on day 2, video 2 gets 10 views and video 1 gets 10 views, putting us at a total of 30 views. This is because on that day 1 we had 10 views, and then from this day 2 we have a total of 20 views. On day 3, a similar thing is going to happen. We're going to upload that third video. Video 3 is going to get 10 views, video 2 gets 10 views, and video 1 gets 10 views. So in total we have 30 views just from day 3, and also 30 views from the previous day, giving us a total views of 60. And you'll see this YouTuber's got too many uploads. He has 4 total uploads, so we're like going off the screen. And so video 4 is getting 10 views, video 3, video 2, video 1, all getting 10 views. So we have a total of 40 views from day 4. The total views of this channel so far is going to be 60 because that was the previous views plus the 40, giving us a total of 100 views. You could see how this tool could be useful to YouTubers that have videos that grow linearly. They want to get a good idea of where their channel might be in a year or 2, for example. Alright, hopefully that clears things up regarding the algorithm. Let's get into the code. Alright, we can start coding the website by going into an empty folder, going to your terminal and saying npx create -next-app at latest. npx assumes that you have Node.js installed, so if you don't have Node.js, just look up how to install Node.js. There's like 1,000 tutorials out there. I'm just going to use the default name my app for this project. Alright, so if you go into your my app, you should have the 100% boilerplate Next.js app in there, which is great. If we go to pages and then we go to index.js, this is where we are going to do the majority of our work for this video. So cd into my-app, because we're going to do a couple of installations here. For this project, we're going to need to npm install 2 different dependencies. The first one we're going to need is npm install chart.js and then add a space. We also need the dependency react-chart.js-2. Alright, so you can go over to your package.json on the left here and see that we have installed chart.js here and then react-chart.js-2 here. Alright, now we can get started. Let's go back to that index.js. We can delete this entire footer. This is just the boilerplate code. We don't need this. Delete the entire footer here. And then delete this entire div. So everything that's inside of this div here we can delete. So the styles.grid div should be deleted. And then I want to keep this main here just for the styles. So I'm going to keep this. And I'm also going to get rid of the head here. So it gives us a nice empty project. So before we get into actually using chart.js, I'm going to create the function that's going to generate that YouTube growth data I explained in the diagram previously. So we can make some space before the return statement and make a function called generate YouTube growth data. In order to generate data, we're going to have the views per day, which is how many views per day a certain user is expecting to get, and then how many days do they want the algorithm to run for. So for example, total days. We want to return an array which looks something like this. Let's say we were going to get 10 views per day, right? We'd want 10 views on the first day, 30 on the next day, just like the algorithm we discussed before, 60 and then 100, right? We want an array just like this. And this is for 10 views per day. And this would be a total of 4 days. And so we can look at this array and kind of create an algorithm to return something like this with any views per day in it over any amount of days. I'm going to name this return array I'm going to name it a variable and say total views array is equal to an array with the starting views we'd expect, which is going to be the views per day. On that first day, we're going to upload a video and it's going to get 10 views, for example, is how we get that initial 10. Then we're going to create a for loop. So we can say for var I equals 1, while I is less than the total days. So this is while I is less than 4, for example. We're going to keep looping through all these different iterations until I is equal to total days. So let's think about how we would get to 30 in this first case, because right now we kind of have an array that is just going to have the 10 like this. And so we can make some variables to make our lives easier. We can create a variable that shows us how many videos do we have on this current day. So we can say var video count is equal to I plus 1. Initially, we're going to have that one video, which is how we got that 10 value initially to kind of start our algorithm. But now, since we're on the second day, we're going to have a total of 2 videos. So it'd be 1 plus 1, for example. So if we wanted to get the total views for this YouTuber so far, we would take a look at this previous 10 value, which we can grab by saying I minus 1. So total views array is equal to the index, which is at 1 minus 1. So it's going to get us the value that is right before it. For example, right now it would be 10. And so that's going to turn into 10 there. And then we are going to add on how many views do our current videos today get. We're going to say we have this many videos today, which is going to be our video count. And then we're going to say each video is going to get how many views per day. Well, we've saved it as a variable here, right? And so this is going to be 2 videos times 10 views per day, which is going to get us that 30, which we would expect, because this is going to become 10 plus 20, because this total views array is going to get us that previous 10 value, and then this video count times the views per day is going to get us that 20, because it's saying 2 times 10. We then want to add this 30 value to our array, so we can take this total views array dot push the total views of the certain day we're on, for example. And you can imagine if we're over 4 days, what's going to happen is I is going to be equal to 1. It's going to add the 30. I is going to be equal to 2. It's going to add the 60. I is going to be equal to 3. It's going to add the 100. And then we're going to break out of our loop because it's going to say, is 4 less than the total days 4? The answer is no. So it's going to break out of our for loop there. So all we need to do at the end is then return our total views array. And if we want to see the result of this function, what we can do is under the function declaration, we can call it with some manual data. So let's say 10 views per day over 4 days. And we can console.log whatever this generates. So go to your console here and we can say npm run dev to start our Next.js app. So right now we don't have anything showing in the application, but if we inspect element and go to the console, we'll see that this array has been shown 2 times because of the dev stuff going on in the background. But we have an array where the 0 is pointing to a 10, the 1 points to the 30, 2 points to the 60, 3 points to the 100. And so let's say we wanted to see the same algorithm over 20 days, for example. We can save it. And then in our application, we're going to see we have all the data. So at 19 days there, they're going to have 2,100 total views. So this is great. This means we actually have data to show when we get to our chart, which we're going to get into right now. In order to get our charts to work, we have to grab a bunch of elements and things related to chart.js and then register those things. So I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. First, we're going to import a bunch of things from a certain library. When you have the curly braces after an import, that means you're generally going to want to take multiple certain things from a certain library, for example, chart.js. We're going to import chart as chart.js. We're going to get the category scale, the linear scale, and just so you guys know, these are all just necessary boilerplate things. It's not anything specific to our use case quite yet. So we just need to get these in here: point element, line element, title, tooltip, legend, and filler. That should be all we need from chart.js, and it's going to be grayed out for a while because we're not using it quite yet. But now we're going to say chart as chart.js up here. We can actually use this chart.js object now. So we can say chart.js.register, and this register is asking us what items would you like to have your Next.js application recognize for the charts you're going to be making. So we want category scale to be registered. We want linear scale to be registered, point element, line element, filler, title, tooltip, and legend. So those are all the different chart things we need registered in order for our charts to work. And once we're done with register, we're going to want to import line, which is the line chart, which is the one we're using for this video, from React-Chart.js-2. So make sure you have this .register at the top of your application. Let's go down here and create a default value for our chart. So we're not going to do any fancy rendering quite yet. We're just going to make a default chart with a bunch of values using this YouTube growth data function. So chart.js gives us access to this thing called line, for example, which is the line chart. It has a couple different properties you can use with it. Its data is going to be equal to a default data object that we are going to create in a second. I'm going to make it have a width of 100, a height of 40. The options are going to be equal to an options object, which we are also creating. And then that's going to be it for now, but we're going to make some additions in the future. So let's get started by creating a const options for our chart. So the options object is a little bit complicated. The main reason behind it is that it allows us to specialize the line chart exactly how we want it to look. The first option we're going to use is the option plugins. Plugins is going to allow us to change the legend to not display. So we don't want to show any keys or anything like that at the top. No legend at the top for our chart. And it also allows us to change the title. And so if we want to show the title, for example, in the application, it shows you, like, let's see, your text, YouTube growth over time with daily uploads. We then want that text to be the color of white. And let's just make it a font where the size is 18 pixels. I know if you're beginning in JavaScript, these kind of like options objects are kind of strange, but they exist in so many different frameworks. Just think of it like this. We're asking chart.js to make the chart look a certain way, right? And so chart.js has their own internal system to kind of do that for us. We're just telling it in the kind of however chart.js defines exactly what we want. So chart.js made the decision and said, okay, if you want to change the title, it's going to be under the plugins option. And so put a comma at the end of your plugins object there. And we're also going to look at things like the elements. Inside of elements, we're allowed to change things like the line or how the actual point looks. The point meaning the little circles you kind of saw in the chart at the beginning of the video. So the line is going to have a tension of 0. Its border width is going to be 1. And then it's going to have a border color. This is like what the actual line looks like. I'm just going to make it light blue to make it simple for this video. The fill is going to be at the start of the line. And then the background color is also going to be light blue. The background color is kind of that color that is under the line that you guys saw in the beginning. Because if you don't have a background color, for example, you would just see only the line, not that whole area under the line like you've seen before. Then, for example, the point, which are the little circles that are showing up, I'm going to make them have a radius of 10, so they're kind of obvious, and then a hit radius of 10. The hit radius is like if your mouse goes over it, does it show you the data or not? So pretty much how big those circles are. And I know this is a lot of setup, guys, but trust me, we're getting there. And the cool thing is, if you want to change these colors or change a border width, it's 100% doable. Even for a beginner, you can just change these numbers around. And so the last object we have to have, so remember it's plugins, comma, elements, and then we're gonna have a comma at the bottom here. The last thing we have to have is something called scales. So this is like the X and Y axes, for example. So we're gonna say, okay, on the X axis, we want display to be equal to true. So we want to show the X axes, and we want those little X ticks, for example, to have a color of white. And so if there are any ticks or any numbers on the X axis, like I've shown, we want those to be the white color as opposed to like gray. And then on the Y axis, this is nice and simple. We can just copy up here and do the exact same things. We want to display the y-axis, and we also want the ticks to be of a white color. I'm just going to put a comma at the end here, so if we ever want to add to this, we can, but that's not necessary. All right, so we're off to a great start. Options is a huge part of working with these charts, and so getting this huge options out of the way so this gets us one step closer to creating our application, which is great. Now I want to create some data that the line chart is going to use by default, the default data object here. I'm just going to use a variable here because we're not going to work with it at all. So I'm just going to say var default data is equal to, we're going to have the labels, which is going to be the x-axis. Pretty much we want an array that looks like this, 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, etc., right? To how many days we want the algorithm to show, for example, let's say like 100, or in this case, 99. One way to do that is to use the spread operator, which if you don't know what that is, I would say don't worry about it for this video, but you can look up spread operator. on an array of 100. And then we want to get all the keys of that array. And so the keys of the array is pretty much going to give us this 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the reason why we're using the spread operator is because you could imagine we are saying this outside blue bracket is on the outside, and then it's on the outside over here. And so we don't want an array within an array. The spread operator allows us to take these inside values and pretty much do this. Boom. So now all those values are inside of our labels, and they're pretty much being used for the x-axis. On the y-axis, they use a thing called data sets to get an idea of what data should be on there. So we're going to say data sets is equal to an array, and then we're going to make a data object in the first part of our array. We want this data object to look something like this. I'm just going to use what we commented up above here. Sorry if that's confusing if I'm jumping around, but we're going to have this 10, 30, 60, 100, for example. So this data object is actually going to use the generate YouTube growth data. And for here, we're going to manually input some default values. We don't have any inputs quite yet. So I'm going to say they're getting videos, they get 10 views a day, and I'm just going to make it go over 100 days, which is also why we have the labels over here at 100. All right, so now we have default data and options set up. I know that takes a second, but now we should be able to go to our local host and take a look at the line graph we created. All right, so your application should look something like this, which is super great news. We have the algorithm starting at 10 views, going to 30, going to 60, going to 100, and continuing to grow at that similar pattern. And we're able to look at any certain day. For example, if I'm at 70 days, I can kind of guess I'll get around 25.5 thousand views on my YouTube channel. And so there's actually some interesting use to using a application like this. Where it gets interesting in this application is having users be able to input their own values. Like, let's say I'm a big YouTuber and I know my videos are going to get 1,000 views per day over the next 100 days, for example. Then I want to get a good idea as to what my growth would look like. And so you can use user inputs to allow people to kind of work with your application. So let's get into creating some user inputs. So I'm going to phrase the user inputs in a way that allows them to kind of change little inputs in a sentence. So I'm going to say H3 for the header 3. I'm going to say my daily uploads will get, then I'm going to create a text input here. I'm going to make it an ID so we can access this input. So this will be the views per day. Its type is going to be a number input. It's going to have a default value of 10. So we can match these defaults over here, for example. I'm going to make an on change soon, but for now that should be good. Then I'm going to make another H3 on the bottom here. So I will get 10 views per day over. Then we can copy this input, bring it down. Now we're going to say over how many days. So the ID is going to be total days. And that default value for now is going to be 100. And so I'm going to say days at the bottom. So this can be like over 50 days, for example. So let's go back to our application and make sure everything is shown up there. All right, great. So as you guys see, because I made it a number input, you can actually go like one at a time, move these up or down. You can even go 30, 40, etc. But the thing that kind of sucks here is that, these inputs, they're not actually impacting the graph. And so we want to make some code. Let's say I change this number to 20, for example. We want to make code that when the user changes the text value here, the actual graph above changes. And this is a really interesting point. And so if we want to kind of re-render the graph with new data, let's make a function to do that, which we can call renderChart. So on these inputs here, I'm going to say onChange is equal to renderChart, which is going to be a function. And then also on here, I'm going to want to render the chart. So whether they change the views per day or the total days, it doesn't really matter. I still want to re-render the chart to show that new data they inputted. And so before we make the render chart, I want to explain something to you guys. If we want to work with this line chart specifically, in React, we have to make a reference to the line chart. And so we can say here, reference is equal to line chart, which is a constant that we are going to declare above. So take this line chart, scroll up to the top of your application, and we are going to import use ref, which means use reference from React. This use reference allows us to reference a specific element inside of our React kind of HTML or JSX, for example. So if we say const line chart is equal to use ref of null, that's how we declare a variable that's going to store a reference. When our React application loads up, it's going to look at line chart, say use ref is initially null, But when it loads this code down in the return statement, it's going to say, oh, the reference for this line here is going to be called line chart. And so we can use this line chart reference throughout our different functions in our code, for example, to reference this line here. The reason why it's so important is with this reference value, you can say, oh, I want to look at, line chart.data. And you can't do this here, but just as an example, line chart.data is going to allow you to access this data property of the line chart. So now that we have this reference, let's go into making a renderChart function. So we can use the reference to actually refresh the chart, for example. Function renderChart. So to get the current reference out of the line chart, I'm going to say const chart is equal to the line chart reference dot current. What is it currently looking at, for example? That's what's going to give us access to the line element, this guy right here. I'm also just going to do a little console.log rendering. So to make sure that our inputs are actually calling renderChart when they get changed, let's go back to our application and try it out. So you can inspect element to see what the console's doing, and then we can make an edit here. Boom. So if we do the daily uploads, we're going to see that it's actually going to change and it's going to print rendering. Then we're also going to see over here, yep, still printing rendering. So that's great news. That means that we actually have functionality to, whatever happens inside of renderChart, it's actually going to get called whenever we edit the text, which is super great. So to get the value of the total days and the views per day text inputs, we can do something like this. We can say var total days is equal to document.getElementById. And we created some IDs previously. If we scroll down to the return statement, we'll see that, oh, we have an ID which is views per day. And so this is just one way in JavaScript to get the value out of a certain input in your web page. So we can say, all right, let's get the views per day, and I want to get the dot value of that certain node. Oh, sorry, this should be total days. And then, as you guys may have seen there, we are then going to do views per day is going to be our other variable. Because as you could go down to our return statement, you'll see we also have the views per day here. And so we can even make some console.logs to be super sure of ourselves. We can say the total days is going to be equal to that total days variable above. And we can console.log the views per day. It's going to be equal to the views per day variable right there. So let's go back to our application. And so now when you make an edit, we should see that, okay, this is going to be 100 views per day over 100 days. Over 10 days, what is it going to look like for 100 views per day on our videos? So you can see that we're actually getting unique information here, which is great. An important part is that these total days and these views per day might be registered as strings. So to make sure we don't try and do any weird things with strings, I'm going to say parse int. Parse int converts a string into a number, as it says here in my VS Code, which is 100% true. And so we just want to make sure that instead of it showing, string 100, we want it to instead show the actual integer 100, which are two completely different things in the eyes of JavaScript. So I'm just going to parse int both of those. All right, so now here's where things get interesting. This chart reference allows us to look at the data property. I think we have it set to current data right now, but it allows us to set this data property as well. And so we can say chart.data is equal to. And so we can make completely new data based off the new user inputs. So we can kind of cheat a little here to make our lives easier is we can scroll down to that default data and just copy up to the object there. Scroll back up, and then you can put this right there. So we're just replacing this data with a couple new things. This 100 is going to be the total days. And so I'm going to put total days where all the 100s are. Because remember, that's what we were doing before is 100 days with 10 views per day. And so now we can make views per day, this views per day variable that way. And so now we kind of have a clean way of understanding what this code does. It's generating this YouTube growth data over how many views per day, which is now a user input, over the specified amount of days specified by the user. So for chart.js, it's expected that when we want to re-render our chart, we have to use a function called chart.update. I know it's kind of strange that we're using this line chart current and making reference to it, but pretty much how you access the update function here is by saying chart.update. It's kind of vague in the documentation as well, but this is going to allow us to show the user a new chart with this data that we just defined. So if we go back to our application, we actually have the working finished product. So if we wanted to say my daily uploads are going to get 1 view per day, it's probably closer to my videos, Let's hope not. But you can get an idea of what that YouTuber's growth would look like, right? So you know he at 90 days he's gonna have a total of like 4.2 thousand views about. And let's say, all right, let's say 1 view a day over 10 days. We're going to see each little circle is still going to show us that correct data, which is actually pretty cool. So you can look at any use case for this little scenario and get a chart showing you the data related to your problem. So let's say over 10 days, I got like 1,000 views a day. Whoa, that's like viral growth. Look at that. In 9 days, you'll have 55,000. All right, so that's pretty much the entire project. I hope this was helpful in enhancing your Next.js knowledge and also in enhancing your working with outside libraries like Chart.js, for example. If you guys are interested in Next.js content, let me know in the comments. And, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you want more content in the future and all that stuff. And hopefully this project was helpful. Thanks for watching.